They put a gate in front of my driveway, so I took down their entire HOA. The HOA tried to trap me behind a paywall, blocking my own home with an illegal gate. So I fought back, exposed their corruption, led a neighborhood rebellion, and had their entire board dismantled. Now, the gate is gone, the HOA is in ruins, and the neighborhood finally belongs to the people again. Mornings for Alex Johnson always started the same way: early, productive, and structured. The rhythmic sound of their sneakers tapping against the pavement filled the quiet suburban air as they jogged through their neighborhood. The streets were peaceful, the houses well-kept, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from porches where retirees read their newspapers. It was the kind of place people moved to when they wanted a calm, predictable life. After a brisk morning run, Alex returned home, showered, and tackled their inbox. As a freelance consultant, their work was flexible but demanding, and mornings were the perfect time to clear out emails before the world got busy. By noon, they had finished the day's most urgent tasks and decided to head out for some errands. Everything about the day felt ordinary, until it wasn't. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, Alex turned onto their street and immediately noticed something was wrong. At first, it was just a feeling something looked off. Their eyes scanned the familiar side of their home, the neatly trimmed hedges framing the driveway, but something was blocking the view. They squinted, gripping the steering wheel tighter. There, right across their driveway, stood a brand new wrought iron gate. Alex's heart skipped a beat. They slowed the car, trying to process what they were looking at. The black metal structure stretched across the entire width of the driveway, complete with a keypad for entry. It was solid, heavy-duty, not something that had been installed on a whim. Confusion flickered into annoyance, then something sharper. They pulled to the curb, cutting the engine, and stepped out onto the pavement. The evening air was cool, but Alex felt a slow burn of frustration rising in their chest. Attached to the center of the gate was a small but infuriatingly official-looking sign: Homeowner Association Restricted Access. Permission and payment required. Alex's stomach dropped. They weren't even part of the homeowner association. Alex took a slow, deep breath, willing their frustration to stay in check. Maybe there was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe the gate was meant for someone else's property, and the workers had just installed it in the wrong place. But as they ran their hand along the cold iron bars, that hope quickly faded. This wasn't some half-baked mistake. The installation was meticulous, heavy-duty posts dug deep into the ground, the keypad mounted neatly to one side. No, this had been planned. Someone had deliberately put up a barrier between them and their own home. Alex's eyes narrowed as they read the sign again. Homeowner Association Restricted Access. Permission and payment required. They clenched their jaw. It didn't just say members only, it implied that access to their own damn driveway now came with a price tag. The Homeowner Association. Alex had never wanted to deal with them. When they first bought the house years ago, the HOA had been a small, voluntary group, mostly concerned with keeping lawns mowed and fences uniform. Some of the neighbors had joined, happy to follow the rules in exchange for a bit of neighborhood order. Alex hadn't. At the time, it had been an easy decision. They owned their property outright, and there was nothing in the deed that required them to follow HOA rules. Why would they pay fees just to have some committee dictate what color they could paint their front door? But over the years, the HOA had grown. They'd started flexing more authority, expanding their reach. Still, Alex had figured they could just ignore it. They weren't members. Their house wasn't part of the HOA's jurisdiction, or so they thought. Alex pulled out their phone and scrolled through their contacts until they found the HOA's number. Years ago, they had saved it just in case, though they had never actually used it. The phone rang. Once. Twice. On the fourth ring, it went to voicemail. Alex let out a slow breath and called again. This time, they navigated through the automated options and selected the extension for the HOA president. More ringing. Then voicemail again. Their patience was thinning fast. They took a steadying breath before leaving a message, keeping their tone measured but firm. This is Alex Johnson. There's a gate blocking my driveway that I didn't authorize. I'm not a member of the HOA, so I expect it to be removed immediately. Call me back. Hanging up, Alex stared at the gate, arms crossed. There was no way in hell they were paying the HOA just to access their own home. If the HOA thought they could force them into compliance, they were in for a fight. Alex stormed inside, slamming the door shut behind them. Their pulse was still racing, frustration buzzing beneath their skin like static. If the HOA thought they could pull something like this and get away with it, they had another thing coming. Dropping their keys on the counter, Alex grabbed their laptop and sat down at the dining table, fingers already flying over the keyboard. If they were going to fight this, they needed to be sure. First, they dug out the paperwork from when they bought the house. It had been years since they last looked at it, but they knew one thing for certain: they had never agreed to be part of the HOA. Their property had been independent when they purchased it, free from any association rules or fees. And sure enough, the deed confirmed exactly that. Nowhere in the legal documents did it state that their home fell under the HOA's jurisdiction. No agreements, no signatures, nothing that could legally tie them to the association's authority. Next, Alex pulled up the county property records, scanning through every detail they could find. It didn't take long to locate the official zoning and boundary maps, and there it was clear as day. The HOA's designated area stopped several houses away. Alex's home and the land surrounding it were completely outside their control. That should have been the end of it. But if the HOA was willing to install a dam gate on their driveway without permission, then they were either unbelievably careless or fully aware that they were crossing a line. Either way, Alex wasn't going to rely on assumptions. They pulled up the HOA's publicly available bylaws, a painfully dense document filled with legal jargon, fine print, and regulations covering everything from trash can placement to approved house colors. It took nearly an hour of skimming through the mess before Alex found the section they were looking for: property governance and authority. And just like they suspected, the HOA's own rules stated that their authority applied only to properties whose owners had voluntarily signed membership agreements. Alex leaned back in their chair, staring at the screen. This wasn't just an overstep, it was blatantly illegal. And now, they had the proof to back it up. Alex didn't waste any more time. The next morning, they reached out to a local law office that specialized in property disputes. Within an hour, they were sitting across from Jessica Carter, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense attitude. She flipped through the copies of the deed, county records, and the HOA's own bylaws, nodding as she skimmed each page. "So let me get this straight," she said, tapping a pen against her desk. "The HOA installed a gate on your property without your consent, and your home isn't even within their jurisdiction?" "Exactly," Alex said, leaning forward. "I've called them, left messages, but they're ignoring me. I need this gate gone." Jessica smirked. Typical HOA power grab. They assume homeowners will just roll over and comply. But legally, they don't have a leg to stand on. She grabbed a sheet of paper and started writing. First step is a cease and desist letter. It lays out the legal violations and demands immediate removal of the gate. If they ignore it, we escalate. Alex nodded. "And by escalate, you mean?" "Filing a formal complaint with the town council and, if necessary, taking them to court," Jessica said. "HOAs hate bad publicity. If they realize you're serious, they might fold before it gets that far." Alex liked the sound of that. They had no interest in a drawn-out legal battle, but they weren't about to let some overreaching committee dictate how they access their own home. That afternoon, Jessica sent the official cease and desist letter to the HOA's office and their president, Mark Peterson. The letter was clear, direct, and left no room for argument. The gate was an unlawful obstruction on private property, and failure to remove it within 7 days would lead to legal action. Alex expected some kind of response, even if it was just an angry phone call from the HOA. Instead, they got nothing. No acknowledgement, no email, no sign that anyone had even read the letter. Meanwhile, the gate stayed exactly where it was, a constant, infuriating reminder of the HOA's arrogance. Alex clenched their jaw. If the HOA thought ignoring them would make them back down, they were dead wrong. It was time to turn up the pressure. Alex had always kept to themselves in the neighborhood, exchanging polite nods with neighbors but never diving too deep into conversations. That changed when the HOA decided to block their driveway. If this gate was happening to them, how many others had been bullied into compliance? The first stop was Margaret, an elderly woman who lived a few houses down. She was out in her front yard tending to her flower beds, her hands gently patting the soil around a row of daisies. When Alex approached, she wiped her hands on her gardening apron and gave a warm smile. "Morning, Alex. Haven't seen you around much lately." Alex hesitated for a second, then pointed down the street. "You heard about the gate they put up in my driveway?" Margaret's smile faltered, her eyes darkening. "Oh, I sure did. The HOA's been pulling stunts like that for years. It's just that most people don't have the fight in them to push back." That caught Alex's attention. "What do you mean?" Margaret sighed and leaned on her small gardening shovel. "A few years back, they fined me for planting these." She gestured to the daisies. "Said they weren't an approved species." Imagine that. paying a fine for growing flowers in my own yard. Alex's frustration deepened. What did you do? I tried fighting it, Margaret admitted. Even had proof that nothing in the HOA bylaws restricted certain flowers. But they just kept threatening me with more fines. Said if I didn't remove them, they'd send a crew to correct the violation and bill me for it. So I paid up, just to be left alone. Alex's jaw tightened. This wasn't just their problem. Over the next few hours, they went door to door, talking to other homeowners, and the stories were all the same. Unfair fines, ridiculous restrictions, and pressure tactics to force compliance. A young couple had been ordered to repaint their house because their color choice wasn't within community standards, even though they had checked beforehand. Another neighbor, Tom, had been fined repeatedly for parking his work truck in his own driveway, despite it being legally registered and not obstructing anything. Everyone had just accepted it, some out of frustration, others out of fear that resisting would only make things worse. Not this time. As the evening stretched on, Alex, Margaret, Tom, and several others gathered in Margaret's backyard, sitting in a loose circle on folding chairs. This gate isn't just about me, Alex told them. It's about them pushing too far. We all thought if we ignored them, they'd leave us alone. But look at what's happening. If we don't stand up to them now, what's next? Margaret nodded. They've been acting like they own this neighborhood. It's about time they were reminded that they work for us, not the other way around. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Tom cracked his knuckles. So what do we do? Alex exhaled, their frustration turning into determination. We fight back. Together. The next morning, Alex wasted no time. If the HOA thought they could get away with pushing people around, they were about to learn otherwise. They sat down with Margaret, Tom, and a few other frustrated neighbors in Margaret's backyard, transforming their quiet frustration into action. The first step was gathering evidence. Alex compiled everything they had. Their property deed proving they weren't under HOA jurisdiction, the county records, the HOA bylaws stating their authority was limited to voluntary members, and even Jessica Carter's cease and desist letter that had been blatantly ignored. Others started bringing their own paperwork. Unfair fines, complaint letters that had gone unanswered, notices threatening forced compliance. Each document painted the same picture. An HOA that overstepped its authority and counted on people being too afraid or too tired to fight back. Once the evidence was organized, they moved on to the next step, getting the community involved. Margaret, being well known in the neighborhood, took charge of calling longtime residents, explaining what was happening and urging them to join the cause. Alex and Tom went door to door, talking to homeowners face to face. They printed flyers outlining the HOA's overreach, the illegal gate installation, and a call to action for a community protest. The message was simple: enough is enough. Take back our neighborhood. At the same time, Alex created a private social media group to coordinate efforts, making it easier for residents to share their experiences, updates, and strategies in real time. The response was overwhelming. People who had quietly suffered under the HOA's grip for years finally felt like they had a voice. Within hours, dozens of homeowners joined the group, each with their own story of unfair treatment. Some had been forced to pay absurd fines. Others had been pressured into expensive home modifications just to comply with arbitrary rules. A few admitted they had never spoken up before because they assumed they were the only ones dealing with it. But now, they realized they weren't alone. With momentum building, they set a date for the protest, Saturday morning, right in front of the HOA office. The plan was simple: a peaceful but highly visible demonstration to demand answers and publicize the HOA's abuses. Volunteers stepped up to help make signs and banners, with messages like "Our homes, our rules, HOA equals abuse of power," and "Remove the gate, remove the greed." The local buzz spread quickly, and word even started reaching beyond their neighborhood. By Friday night, everything was in place. The evidence was gathered, the community was united, and the HOA had no idea what was coming. Alex sat back and looked at their phone, scrolling through the flood of messages in the group chat. This was bigger than just a fight about a gate now. This was about making sure the HOA never pulled a stunt like this again. Tomorrow, they were going to make sure the whole town knew what was happening. Saturday morning arrived, and the neighborhood was buzzing with anticipation. What had started as a few frustrated homeowners venting in Margaret's backyard had grown into a full-blown movement. People were ready to fight back. By 9 a.m., residents began gathering outside the HOA office, a dull, beige building that sat at the edge of the neighborhood. Armed with signs, banners, and an unshakable determination, the crowd grew larger by the minute. Alex stood at the front, gripping a sign that read, "HOA Overreach stops here." As more neighbors arrived, some dragging along their reluctant spouses, others excitedly exchanging stories of their HOA nightmares. The energy was electric. This wasn't just about the gate anymore. It was about years of unchecked power, about fines that made no sense, about rules that changed whenever the HOA felt like it. Then came the moment that changed everything. Local news vans pulled up. Someone had tipped off the press, and now cameras were rolling, capturing the growing crowd as people chanted, "Our homes, our rules." A reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand, asking Alex what the protest was about. This was the moment. Alex took a deep breath and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. The HOA has been abusing its power for years, but this time they went too far. They put up a gate in my driveway, on my private property, without my permission, and when I confronted them, they ignored me. I'm not even part of the HOA, and I have the legal documents to prove it. And I'm not the only one they've targeted. They find people for parking in their own driveways, for planting flowers, for painting their homes a slightly different shade than what they approve of. We've had enough. This is our neighborhood, not theirs to control. The crowd erupted into cheers. The reporter turned to Margaret, who stood proudly holding a sign that said, "Daisies are not a crime." She told her story, voice steady despite the years of frustration bubbling beneath it. Then Tom stepped forward, recounting how the HOA had bullied him into renting storage for his work truck even though there was nothing illegal about parking it at his own home. The news crew filmed it all. Real people, real stories, and a community that wasn't backing down. Then, just as things were reaching their peak, the front doors of the HOA office swung open. Out stepped Mark Peterson, the HOA president, flanked by a couple of board members. He had the same smug look he'd worn when Alex confronted him at the office, but now, under the glare of cameras and the watchful eyes of the entire neighborhood, he looked far less comfortable. The reporter turned to him. "Mr. Peterson, do you have a response to these allegations?" Peterson cleared his throat, forcing a tight smile. The Homeowner Association is simply enforcing policies designed to maintain the integrity and security of the community. The gate was installed as part of a broader safety initiative. Alex stepped forward, raising their voice so everyone could hear. "Then why did you install it on private property? Why did you ignore the cease and desist letter? Why do your own bylaws say that homeowners who haven't signed an agreement aren't under your control?" Peterson's face twitched. He wasn't expecting pushback this direct, especially not with the cameras rolling. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, someone in the crowd yelled, "Take the gate down." The chant spread like wildfire. "Take the gate down. Take the gate down." Peterson raised a hand, trying to regain control, but it was too late. The protest had turned into something bigger than him, bigger than the HOA. The people of the neighborhood weren't afraid anymore. And for the first time, Mark Peterson looked like a man who knew he was losing. The protest had done its job. The pressure was too much for the HOA to ignore, and within days, the town council scheduled a public hearing to address the growing complaints against the Homeowner Association. Word spread fast, and by the time the meeting started, the council chamber was packed with frustrated residents, eager to see the HOA held accountable. Alex sat near the front, their evidence neatly organized in a folder, waiting for their turn to speak. Margaret sat beside them, gripping a printed copy of her ridiculous flower fine, while Tom had brought a stack of letters from the HOA demanding payment for community violations. Around them, neighbors whispered in hushed tones, some still stunned that it had come to this. At exactly 6 p.m., the council members took their seats, and the hearing began. The council chairman, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Richard Lawson, cleared his throat and addressed the room. "We're here to discuss allegations of overreach by the Homeowner Association," he said. "We will hear testimony from affected residents and allow the HOA to respond before we determine if further action is necessary." His gaze flickered toward the row of HOA board members, including Mark Peterson, who sat with his arms crossed, clearly annoyed. Alex was called up first. They stood, took a breath, and stepped forward. This was it. "Thank you for your time," Alex began, keeping their voice steady. I want to be clear, this isn't just about a disagreement with the HOA. This is about a pattern of abuse and overreach that has affected dozens of homeowners. They placed their property deed on the table in front of the council. This document proves that my property is not under HOA jurisdiction. Yet, without my consent, they installed a gate across my driveway, blocking me from accessing my own home. A murmur spread through the crowd. Alex continued, pulling out a copy of the HOA's own bylaws. Here's where it gets worse. According to their own rules, they only have authority over homes with signed agreements. I never signed anything. They acted illegally, and when I sent a cease and desist letter, they ignored it. Richard Lawson flipped through the documents, his frown deepening. "Mr. Peterson," he said, turning to the HOA president, "would you care to explain this?" Mark Peterson stood slowly, adjusting his tie. The homeowner association's goal has always been to maintain security and order in the community. The gate was part of a broader safety initiative. "That's a lie," Alex interrupted, refusing to let him dodge the truth. "You put up that gate to force me into compliance with an HOA I never agreed to join. And I'm not the only one you've done this to." Margaret stood next, her voice unwavering despite her age. "They fined me hundreds of dollars just for planting flowers in my front yard," she said, holding up the notice. "When I tried to fight it, they threatened to remove them themselves and charge me even more." Then Tom stepped forward. "They fined me repeatedly for parking my work truck in my own driveway. I had to rent a storage space just to get them off my back." One by one, other residents stood and told their stories: unfair fines, intimidation tactics, arbitrary rule changes designed to squeeze more money out of homeowners. The longer it went on, the more the HOA board members squirmed in their seats. By the time the last neighbor spoke, the entire room was against the HOA. Richard Lawson turned back to Peterson. "Mr. Peterson, I'm going to ask you one more time, on what legal grounds did you install that gate?" Peterson hesitated. For the first time, he had no answer. I will need to review our policies," he stammered. "That's not good enough," Lawson shot back. "This council takes property rights very seriously. Based on the evidence provided tonight, we have reason to believe the homeowner association has been acting outside its legal authority. We will be launching a formal investigation into its practices." Applause erupted from the crowd. Alex let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of the fight finally start to shift in their favor. The HOA had lost control, and soon they'd lose a whole lot more. The ruling came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the hearing, the town council officially declared that the HOA had no legal authority over Alex's property. The council issued a formal order demanding that the gate be removed within 48 hours or the HOA would face fines for trespassing and illegal property obstruction. It was a decisive win, not just for Alex, but for everyone who had been quietly suffering under the HOA's overreach. The morning of the deadline, Alex stood on their front porch, arms crossed, watching as a work crew arrived to dismantle the gate. They weren't alone. Neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, watching with satisfaction as the metal structure was unbolted, piece by piece. Margaret stood beside Alex, a smug smile on her face as she sipped her coffee. At the edge of the scene, Mark Peterson stood with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his usual smug demeanor replaced by something else: anger, frustration, and maybe even a hint of fear. Alex wasn't about to let him walk away without a word. "So," Alex said, stepping closer, "looks like your little safety initiative didn't hold up." Peterson exhaled sharply, avoiding eye contact. "This wasn't necessary, you know. We were just trying to maintain order in the community." "Order?" Alex scoffed. "You blocked my driveway without permission. You fined Margaret for planting flowers. You bullied Tom into paying for off-site parking. That's not order, Mark, that's control. And now, you're losing it." Before Peterson could reply, a town council official arrived on site to oversee the removal. But the council wasn't just interested in the gate anymore. They had started digging deeper. In the days following the hearing, more homeowners had come forward, filing official complaints against the HOA. The council announced a full-scale investigation into the organization's finances, its leadership, and its history of enforcing arbitrary fines. What started as a fight over a gate had snowballed into something bigger, a full-on reckoning. And then, the real blow came. A local news outlet published a report exposing the HOA's shady financial practices. It turned out that many of the fines collected from homeowners had been mismanaged, with thousands of dollars unaccounted for. Instead of using the funds for community maintenance like they claimed, the HOA board had been spending excessively on executive perks, private events, and even travel expenses. Peterson's empire was crumbling fast. Within a week, he and several board members resigned, hoping to escape further scrutiny. But it was too late. The town council took over temporary oversight of the HOA, ensuring that a new leadership board would be elected, one that actually represented the interests of the homeowners. As the last pieces of the gate were hauled away, Alex let out a slow breath. The battle was won, but the real victory wasn't just the removal of the gate. It was the fact that the entire neighborhood had woken up. The HOA had ruled with intimidation for years. Not anymore. Alex turned to Margaret, who was grinning ear to ear. "I guess we showed them, huh?" Margaret chuckled, raising her coffee cup. "Damn right we did." With Mark Peterson and his cronies out, the HOA was in shambles. The town council's investigation had revealed years of corruption, financial mismanagement, and rule enforcement based on intimidation rather than fairness. The fines homeowners had paid, sometimes under threat, had lined the pockets of a select few rather than going toward actual neighborhood improvements. The backlash was swift and brutal. Peterson tried to distance himself from the mess, claiming he had only been following precedent, but no one was buying it. The damage was done. The HOA board collapsed as more members resigned, hoping to dodge the consequences. But the town council wasn't letting anyone off easy. There were legal repercussions looming, and some former board members were being forced to return misused funds. In the wake of the chaos, the town council temporarily took control of the HOA, ensuring that no more arbitrary fines, sudden rule changes, or illegal property seizures would happen again. But the biggest change was yet to come. A new leadership board was formed, one that actually represented the homeowners. The community would now have real oversight, transparency in how fees were used, and protections against the kind of unchecked authority that had plagued them for years. Alex wasn't interested in running for the new board, but they made sure to be involved in the process. They worked with neighbors, attended meetings, and ensured that the new HOA charter included safeguards against future abuse. This time, there would be clear limitations on power, no forced memberships, and a system for challenging unfair rulings. For the first time in a long while, the neighborhood felt different. People who had once kept to themselves started talking to each other, helping each other. Neighbors who had lived in quiet frustration for years now had a voice, and they weren't afraid to use it. The fight against the HOA had started as a battle over a gate, but it had transformed into something much bigger, a community finally taking back control of its own future. One evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Alex stood at the end of their now gate-free driveway, watching as a few kids rode their bikes down the street. Margaret was tending to her flower garden, this time without fear of a fine. Tom was in his driveway, his work truck parked right where it belonged. Alex took a deep breath, feeling something they hadn't felt in months: peace. They hadn't just fought against an HOA. They had built something better in its place. And this time, no one was going to take that away from them.